Good evening. Welcome back to my channel, Ghouls and Ghosts and Goblins of the World. Today, this even at midnight, the witching hour. The world between veils and darkness is open. We are going to start this night with a creature called half bat, half animal, or the vaquero Van Meter Visitor of Illinois. A cryptid. Described 7 to 9 feet tall, or 2 to 27 meters. 2 to 2.7 meters tall. Immune bullets. Laid out bright light from his horn. And extremely aggressive. This creature was spotted back in 1903. And sightings have been depicted since then. The Van Meter Visitor, or the Van Meter Monster, the flying cryptid that is said to have been seen in Vision in 1903, when a number of local town folks reported a strange creature that terrorizes the town for 7 nights. And each night, this creature came back, always at 1 a.m., 3 a.m. in the mornings. Skeptics stress that the creature could have been a hoax, misidentification of a known animal, or a supernatural phenomenon. The Van Meter Visitor is described as a hybrid animal that combines human and animal features. It has a very bat-like wings, red eyes, and a horn that produces on its head, which would instead emit bright light. Witnesses describe the monster as having a very distinct and unpleasant smell. First sighting happened in September 1903. I'm saying period September 11th at 1 a.m. in a town's business district. A businessman was returning home and he saw the Van Meter Visitor for the first time. This encounter was followed by more sightings, all from people in the community, including town doctors, bankers, teachers, miners, sheriff, everything. All the witnesses agreed that it looked half human, half animal, with enormous bat wings, with some saying that it looked like the devil himself. Townspeople attempted to shoot the monster, but the bullets did not have any effect on it. They decided to form a hunting party and after hearing strange noises coming from an abandoned coal mine near the town, they went to investigate. There they found 2 creatures, one big and one small. They began to shoot at them, but the monsters flew away unscathed by the bullets, only to return the next morning. The townspeople returned to the mine and decided to seal the entrance up, therefore sealing the 2 creatures inside. Here's a news article right here. Seeing strange things, half human, half bat, with great bat-like wings. The New York Times, October 12th. A sketchy can't read all of it. Here, Miss Williams, yo. There you go. There's evidence right there. After the incident in 1903, there weren't any sightings reported. However, in 1980, sightings have started back again. The first report was given by a man who was walking near the coal mine and reported seeing a 5-foot-long bat-like creature flying overhead. He claimed he never heard of the Van Meter Monster before his sighting. In 2000, a family was driving on 2 Van Meter when they said they saw a giant bat-like creature lying dead on the road. When they came back, it was gone. In 2006, now you do the math. 1903, that's 100. Let's see, 1903, 2005, 2025, that's 122 years. Okay, first sighting happened in 1903, right? Okay, then the next sighting, it happened in 1903. Then 1903, the next sighting happened in 1980. That's 7 years. Then the next happened in 2000. Okay, first right here, we'll do like 1903 minus 2025. That's 122 years. Now minus, it happened, it showed up again in 1980. So that's, phew. It was first started in 1903. Okay. Now let's do 1903 is the track, 1980. That'll give us 77 years. It will have not been spotted in 77 years. Now, plus it happened again in 2000. That's right. Okay, yeah, I was getting out of hand here. It was spotted in 1980, then back in 2000, then back in 2006, and it's only spotted 2 more times in 2014 and 2020. It sounds like 7 years apart from each other. First sighting happening from 1903 and 1980. That's 77 years. Next sighting between 1980 and 2000. That was 20 years. Okay. First sighting was 77 years. The second sighting was 20 years. Now, let's do this. From 2006 to 2014. That's 8 years. And now 2014 to 2020. That's 6 years. Now let's add all these years right here that has seen it. That's 111 years. 111 times it has been spotted. So, 1903 to 1980, that's 77 years. 1980 to 2002, that would be 20 years. 2020 to 2006. 2000 to 2006 was 8 years. Then that is 6 years. So, people, is it the same creature they seen way back then? Or is this just offspring, the children of that creature they seen now? I found a video here of it too. There have been reports of it like a human-shaped object with bat-like features and everything. Have a horn protruding on his nose or on top of his head. But be honest, people, you don't know what goes bump in the night there at all. Really don't know what goes bump in the night. Here's the video of what they said the creature might have been. So let's get to the video, shall we? Hope you enjoy this 25-minute video. So let's get to it, shall we?
Was sleeping in his office on the second floor of a building also on Main Street. Now, he often stayed late at his practice, and he'd set up a small bed there for nights when he was just too tired to make it back home. And so on this night, he was asleep, and around 2 in the morning, this brilliant light suddenly flooded through his window, and it was so bright that it woke him instantly. He sat up in bed and looked toward the window, and perched there on the ledge outside was something that made no sense. It was this creature, probably 8 or 9 feet tall, enormous bat-like wings, but the strangest part, of course, was the horn that jutted out from its forehead, and it was glowing like a searchlight, but it was just sitting there looking in at him through the glass. And then he noticed the smell. Now, even through the closed window, this overwhelming stench was seeping into his office. It was like sulfur mixed with rotting meat. He was not the kind of man who was easily scared. I mean, he'd been a doctor in Van Meter for years and had seen plenty of strange things. So instead of cowering in his bed, he got up, walked over to his cabinet, pulled out a shotgun, and he loaded it. Walked back to the window, threw it open, and this thing on the other side of the window, it just sat there, as if taunting him to do something. And so he raised the shotgun, aimed at it point blank at its chest, and pulled the trigger. The blast should have blown the thing clean off the ledge. At that range, the buckshot should have torn right through it, but it didn't flinch. The pellets just bounced off its hide like they were hitting solid rock. The thing tilted its head almost like it was confused by what the doctor had just tried to do, and then it spread its wings and flew off into the night. Dr. Alcott slammed the window shut, locked it, and then barricaded his door. And he spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair with his shotgun across his lap, waiting for the sun to come up. Because of what happened to him and the fact that he was a doctor, so he was a voice of authority, word spread quickly all throughout Van Meter about what he had seen. And remember that this was a small town. There's only like about 1,000 people who live there, and news traveled pretty fast. Some people thought that the doctor had been drinking, and others thought he just had these lucid nightmares, but again, he was well respected and wasn't going to make things up and risk his reputation. That's when Eugene Griffith also came forward and admitted he'd seen the same thing just the night before. Now, the next night, on October 1st, the town's bank cashier, a man named Clarence Dunn, who everyone just called him Peter, decided he was going to catch whatever this thing was. Now, Dunn didn't believe in monsters or ghosts or any of that nonsense, and he was convinced this had to have been some elaborate hoax, that there was somebody going around scaring people, or maybe it was somebody in a costume. But regardless, about 2 o'clock in the morning, he positioned himself inside the bank with a repeating shotgun loaded with buckshot. And he sat there in the dark, just watching the street through the front window, waiting, hoping that at some point in the night, he would catch a glimpse of this mysterious creature that everybody was talking about. And he kept waiting and he kept waiting. And sure enough, around 2:30, all of a sudden, he just saw this piercing light that suddenly blazed through the glass. And it was so bright that Dunn actually had to shield his eyes. He didn't hesitate. He knew what he was going up against, and he raised his shotgun and fired through the window, not caring if it was an animal or a creature or a person on the other side. The plate glass exploded outward in a shower of fragments. Dunn, of course, then rushed to the shattered window, and he looked out, expecting there to be a body somewhere, or at least some blood or something, but he didn't see anything. He grabbed a lantern, he went outside to investigate, and he started looking down at the dirt, and he found something strange. There were footprints right outside the window, but they were 3-toed impressions, kind of like a massive bird. Acting quickly, he actually made a plaster cast of one of the prints. But of course, nobody knows what happened to that cast. Of course, right? It's been lost to history. This episode is sponsored by Mint Mobile. Now, at this time, the town was completely terrified. Multiple people at this point had found themselves staring up at a creature with a glowing horn on its head. But you know what they didn't have to worry about? Their cell phone bill. Mint Mobile fixes that problem. They've reimagined wireless by making the entire process easy and online. This means no stores, no pushy salespeople, just premium wireless starting at $15 a month. Here's the deal though. All Mint plans include unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network. You could even call Canada, Mexico, and the UK at no extra charge. And if you grab their unlimited plan, you get a hotspot included up to 10 gigabytes. So you can stream live footage the next time you run into this mysterious glowing horned creature. Here's my favorite part. Mint is all about bulk savings. This means you could lock in 3, 6, or 12-month plans. The more months you buy up front, the more you save, and you can customize the amount of data you need. It could be 5 gigabytes, 15, 20 gigabytes, or unlimited. You're not stuck to a one-size-fits-all plan. And switching is crazy simple. You can sign up and activate in just minutes from your couch with an eSIM, and you keep the same phone number and contacts. That means no hassles, no nonsense, no terrible blurry photographs that look like they're shot on a potato. So if you're ready to save big on your wireless and finally escape those overpriced monthly bills, head to the link below and grab your 3-month introductory plan today. New customers get premium wireless that starts at $15 a month. That's mintmobile.com. Check the link below. That same night, just a couple of hours after Dunn's experience, O.V. White was awakened by a commotion just outside his hardware store. Mr. White lived in an apartment above his shop, and when he looked out his window, he saw something that made him grab his rifle immediately. There was this thing that was perched on top of a telephone pole right outside. Except it wasn't like a bat or a bird, it was just this massive 8-foot tall with these bat-like wings that folded in on itself. But this time, the horn on its head wasn't glowing. It was just dark, and White could clearly see that this thing was using this kind of hooked-shaped beak, kind of like a raptor, but it was using it to grip the pole as it descended. And White didn't know what to think. He was terrified. He just aimed and fired, not caring if he killed this thing or not. The bullet struck the pole right where this thing had been, but it had already leapt off, and the way it moved was so incredibly bizarre. It didn't run or fly, it kind of hopped and used its wings to help propel these very strange, enormous kangaroo-like bounds all across the ground. White was immediately hit with this strange, overpowering stench, and it was so strong that Sidney Gregg, who lived only 3 houses down, was awakened by the gunfire and then came to his window just in time to see this thing launch itself into the sky and vanish. Now, as you can imagine, now that we have all these additional sightings, people were really freaking out because by October 2nd, the entire town of Van Meter was in a state of near panic. 3 respected citizens had seen this thing, multiple people had shot at it with no effect, and these bizarre 3-toed tracks were being seen by plenty of folks around town. The town called for an emergency meeting. They needed to figure out what this thing was and where it was coming from. Somebody had mentioned that the night shift workers at the brick kiln had been hearing strange sounds for weeks and that they might know what's happening. As it turns out, the sounds were coming from the old coal mine. The mine had been dug back in 1878, going down 257 feet to pull out coal and clay. But by 1903, it was mostly abandoned except for the brick-making operation nearby. J.L. Platt Jr., who was foreman of the brick plant, confirmed that his workers had been hearing things. Scraping sounds, weird movements, and sometimes what sounded like wings but flapping deep down in the shaft. At this point, the town knew what they had to do. They formed a posse. All the men were armed with rifles and shotguns and torches and pitchforks and whatever light they could gather. And they just marched out there at the mine on the night of October 2nd, and they waited for this thing to show itself. They positioned themselves in a semicircle around the mine entrance, hiding behind equipment and piles of bricks. And they waited for hours. And finally, midnight came and went. And some of them were starting to think that maybe this was all just mass hysteria. They were realizing this was incredibly foolish. They were wasting their time. They decided that they would stick it out and wait until sunrise. Around 1 a.m, all of them heard a noise coming from down in the mine shaft. It was the same sounds many of the coal workers had described, scraping, movement, flapping, but it was getting closer. And all of a sudden, this thing emerged from the mine shaft. It pulled itself up and unfurled these massive wings in the light, and the horn on its head began to glow, and it had these strange little beams of light almost coming off of it. It's hard to describe. Everyone was terrified. They held their breaths, their fingers on the trigger, and they waited for the signal to fire. Something unexpected happened. A second one of these things emerged from the mine shaft behind the first. This one was smaller, maybe a foot or 2 shorter than the other, but it looked identical. Without another second going by, somebody in the crowd just screamed, "Fire!" Everybody erupted in gunfire. Rifles and shotguns and dozens of bullets all aimed at these 2 things standing there. But just like before, the bullets had no effect. They seemed to strike these things and just bounce off. And the creatures didn't even seem particularly bothered either. They turned almost casually and dropped back down into the mine shaft. They stopped their firing, everybody was stunned, but by then, both creatures suddenly shot out of the mine, airborne this time, circling above the posse, and their horns continued to glow as some of the men below kept trying to shoot at them, but it was pointless. These things were too high and too fast. Just before dawn, both of them dove back down and vanished into the mine, but this time, they did not come back out. Now, as the sun rose on October 3rd, all the men of Van Meter made a decision that they would gather wood, rocks, anything they could find, and they would permanently seal the entrance to that mine. They packed it tight, made sure nothing could get in or out, and the Van Meter visitor, that's what newspapers started calling it, was never seen again. Now, you might just be thinking that this was just a local legend or some tall tale that got blown out of proportion, and, maybe it kind of was, but the story was so sensational that it was picked up by newspapers all across the country. I mean, you had papers in New York City that ran articles about it, the town kept detailed records, and these were all real people. U.G. Griffith, Dr. Alcott, Peter Dunn, O.V. White. You can look them up in historical records. People have tried their best to explain it away, or at least theorize what it can be. In fact, the local school principal at the time theorized that it might be some kind of antediluvian creature, which is basically a prehistoric animal that had somehow survived in that mine. So the idea of something flying around Van Meter seemed almost impossible as the creature itself. What makes this story even stranger is that Van Meter wasn't the only place where winged creatures were sighted. The Mothman in West Virginia in the 1960s, the Jersey Devil in 1909, and just a few years ago, in 2020, there were several reports of winged creatures near Boone, Iowa. The old mine is still there, still sealed. In 2013, Van Meter started holding an annual visitor festival. They do tours of the sites where the encounters happen, and an episode of Expedition X even investigated using thermal cameras and drones at the mine site, but they didn't find anything. Here's something to think about. The night shift workers at the brick kiln had heard sounds from that mine for weeks before the sightings started. And when these finally emerged, there were two of them, a mated pair possibly, living down in that mine for who knows how long. Whatever those things were, as far as anyone knows, they never got out. On an August evening in 2009, a man from Vinton, Iowa decided to go for a walk through the countryside. He grabbed his MP3 player, slipped on his headphones, and tucked a bottle of water into his pocket before heading out the door. Nothing about this particular evening suggested it would be anything other than a peaceful stroll. The sun was already hanging pretty low as he made his way down the gravel road, and he'd already covered a couple of miles listening to music and enjoying the landscape around him. But as it began to get darker, he figured it was time to turn around and head back home. As he walked back along the same route, he noticed one of his neighbor's dogs barking somewhere up ahead. But the dog sounded like it was agitated, like it had spotted something on the road. But dogs, they bark at everything, from rabbits, raccoons, shadows. So he didn't think much of it. He just kept walking, listening to his music. And then he started to smell something. And at first, it was faint. As he continued down the road, it got stronger. And it was awful, like wet dog and skunk spray and rotten eggs all intermixed. Now, he passed by a trailer sitting off to his right, and there was this single lamppost standing beside it, maybe like 100 feet from the street. Even though the light was dim, and it was barely enough to cut through the darkness, it still provided at least some sort of light. And so by the time he reached the area near it, the odor was so thick he could practically taste it. So he stopped walking right there in front of the light post, reached down to his MP3 player to change the song, and he noticed that there was something moving in the ditch beside the road. Figuring it was maybe a raccoon, he turned to look, and then whatever it was began to stand up, and it kept standing and standing. And at this point, whatever he was looking at was so massive, at least 10 feet, and its entire body was this kind of reddish brown and had very thick matted fur, and he could see that the shape of the head was very oval, and the body was incredibly broad. He couldn't really see a neck. This large, bulky silhouette was actually facing away from him, and it hadn't noticed he was there. For a moment, he just stood there frozen on the road, still holding onto his MP3 player. He didn't dare move his finger. Even though the music was still playing in his ears, he couldn't actually hear it. All he could focus on was this shape in front of him. That's when this thing started walking, and it climbed out of the ditch on two legs and moved with a very heavy, deliberate gait. And it walked straight into the field beside the road, heading for the tree line of the wooded area off in the distance. But just before it disappeared, it let out this strange scream that was so different than anything he had ever heard. He was so frightened by this that he turned and ran and sprinted all the way home, not looking back once. But the next morning, he had to go to the grocery store just to pick up a few things. And as he was standing in line at the checkout, he had overheard two of his neighbors talking. This was actually a couple who had lived down the street, and they had woken up to find two of their baby cattle missing. But the strangest part was how they disappeared. The branches on the trees leading to where the cattle had been kept were snapped in half. 3 sapling trees had been completely torn from the ground, roots and all. Unfortunately, whatever it is he saw that night in the ditch will remain a mystery. On a humid afternoon in 1872, a farmer named Peter Mayer was working his plow through the dark Iowa soil near an old Indian burial mound. The blade caught on something hard. Mayer stopped his horses and knelt down to clear whatever stone was blocking his path. But when he pulled the object from the earth and brushed away all the dirt, he saw this wasn't just a stone. It was a carved smoking pipe. And the carving showed what looked like an elephant. Trunk, tusks, everything. Mayer stood there in his field, turning the pipe over in his hands. The elephant was unmistakable. 4 legs, a distinctive curved trunk, and even carved ears. But none of this made sense because there weren't any elephants in Iowa. There never had been. He figured maybe the carving was just worn down in a way that made it look like an elephant, because rocks can play tricks on you sometimes. Or maybe somebody was pulling a prank, planting fake artifacts near the burial mounds. People did that kind of thing. Mayer pocketed the pipe and went back to plowing. But that evening, he showed it to his brother-in-law, who happened to know Reverend Jacob Gass. He collected artifacts, studied burial mounds, that sort of thing. And so when he heard about Mayer's pipe, he immediately tried to buy it from Mayer's brother-in-law, but the man wouldn't sell. So he did the next best thing. He examined the pipe carefully with his magnifying glass, measuring every angle and noted every detail. Then he made a plaster casting of it. He took photographs. He wanted to preserve every aspect, because the more he looked at it, the more certain he became. This was an elephant. The tusks were carved right. Somebody had carved this with intimate knowledge of what an elephant actually looked like. He brought his castings and photographs to the Davenport Academy, and a William Pratt, who at the time was the president, called for a special meeting. The members gathered around the long oak table in their meeting room, gas lamps flickering on the walls, passing the photographs from hand to hand, and some of the members thought it was a hoax. End of story. Maybe some traveling showman had seen elephants back east and just carved the pipe as novelty. It's really not that big of a deal. Others pointed out that it wasn't just simply dismissed. The pipe's style of carving, it looked genuinely old, like really old. One of the other members of the table spoke up, and they'd been thinking about the problem. What if ancient Native Americans had actually seen elephants? Not African or Asian, but mastodons. American elephants that had lived here thousands of years ago. I mean, scientists do speculate that mastodons had once roamed North America, though a small group had survived on some island off Siberia until what they say is 3,600 years ago. But people seeing them in Iowa? I mean, that would completely rewrite history. The Academy voted to document the find officially. They were very careful and scientific about it. They presented the evidence and let readers draw their own conclusions. But more elephant pipes started turning up. In Muscatine County, some German settlers found 2 pipes in a burial mound. One showed a bear, normal enough, but the other was another elephant. Same style of carving, same attention to all the anatomical details. In 1888, Louisa County, another mound, another elephant pipe. That made 3 total. All from different locations, all from these ancient burial sites. The Davenport Academy now possessed the most remarkable collection of pre-Columbian elephant artifacts in the world. But, of course, people were split. Some people pushed the mastodon theory hard in journals like American Antiquarian. Ancient peoples must have encountered these creatures, they argue. How else could you explain such accurate carvings? It is preposterous. But the Smithsonian Institution in Washington simply wasn't buying it. Joseph McGuire, writing an official Smithsonian publication about Native American pipes in 1899, barely mentioned the elephant pipes. When he did, his skepticism was obvious. There was something else going on here, though, something beyond just pipes and elephants. The Smithsonian and the Davenport Academy were locked in a bigger fight about the burial mounds themselves. Smithsonian scientists believed Native Americans had built them, but the Davenport Academy kept finding things in these mounds that suggested otherwise. Crucifixes, hand mirrors, pieces of armor, even a silver cross in mound number 8. All of this pointed to some other explanation, that maybe ancient Europeans had come to America. Maybe there was some lost civilization. The elephant pipes fit into this theory, and Davenport needed those theories to be true. They'd staked their reputation on challenging the Smithsonian's version of American prehistory. Fast forward to 2009, and a science writer named Brian Switek wrote about them. And that article caught the attention of Marshall McCusick, a University of Iowa professor who'd been studying the Davenport Academy for years at this point. Now, McCusick had written something called the Davenport Conspiracy, and when he'd gone through all of the Academy's older records, he found something that was quite disturbing. It would turn out that the Davenport Academy had been caught fabricating evidence. Oh no. Well, the Davenport tablets, which are these stone slabs supposedly covered in ancient writing, had been the Academy's prized discovery. Well, I guess you guys can probably assume that they weren't real. They'd supposedly found them in a mound, documented them, published papers about them, and these tablets prove they said that some advanced civilization had been in Iowa long before Columbus. But McCusick's research revealed what we all suspected. They were fake. That someone had taken regular roofing tiles, carved fake symbols, and then planted them in the mound for the Academy to find. But this wasn't isolated, because during the same time period, all sorts of suspicious artifacts kept turning up in mounds that the Academy investigated. Crucifixes that looked medieval but weren't, armor that seemed ancient but had modern tool marks. The Academy had been so desperate to prove the Smithsonian wrong, to show that Native Americans hadn't built the mounds, that they'd started planting evidence, or at a minimum, they'd been remarkably uncritical about obviously fake artifacts that supported their theories. Which brings us all the way back to Peter Mayr's pipe. Now, Mayr probably didn't fake anything himself, he was just a farmer who found something strange, but once that pipe reached gas in the Davenport Academy, once it became evidence in the war with the Smithsonians, I mean, who knows what happened. It's convenient that the other two elephant pipes turned up right when the Academy needed them the most, right when their theories were under attack. Today, those pipes still exist, and you could see the castings, study the photographs, everything. But whether Peter Mayr really pulled an ancient artifact from that Iowa soil, or whether someone else carved that elephant and made sure it ended up in his field near that burial mound, that's something we'll probably never know for sure. Unfortunately, even that, folks, remains a mystery. And because you guys made it this far, I want you to all comment down below